When my son stood up at the dinner table and asked me, "Mom, is it okay if I show them the letter you never sent him?" the air left the room. Forks froze mid-air. My aunt stopped chewing. My brother choked on his drink. No one laughed after that, not even my father. That was the moment everything shifted. I'm Ilara. I've been a single mom since the day my son was born. I've gotten used to the subtle looks people give us, strangers at grocery stores, teachers at school meetings, and worst of all, my own family. They never say anything outright. They don't need to. The judgment hangs in the air like smoke you can't wave away. My son's name is Zayden. He's 10 years old, quiet, gentle, smarter than most adults I know. He watches people more than he talks to them. And I've always admired that about him. He sees things others don't. He doesn't miss anything. We were at my parents' house for Thanksgiving, something I always debated skipping. Every year, I tell myself, maybe this time it'll be different. It never is. I'm the only one who shows up alone, the only one who gets one less chair set at the table, and they make sure I feel it. My dad, Luther, is a man of few words and even fewer apologies. He's the kind of person who believes that if you're struggling, it must be your own fault. My mom, Myra, isn't unkind, but she lets things slide. She smooths over the cracks with empty compliments and awkward smiles, hoping the silence will settle everything. It never does. My brother, Clay? He's the kind of man who still calls women girls and thinks being offensive is the same as being funny. He's always been like that, sharp-tongued, arrogant, a walking reminder of the things I chose to walk away from. His favorite hobby is making others feel small, especially me. And then there's Aunt Brenna, who always has something to say, followed by, "Don't take it the wrong way." Her way of expressing love feels more like humiliation with a smile. Zayden and I sat quietly through most of dinner. He played with his mashed potatoes and whispered questions to me about the books he'd brought in the car. I answered, glad for the distraction. But I knew the jokes were coming. They always came. It started with Clay. He reached for another helping of stuffing and said with a grin, "Kid's real quiet, huh? Must have gotten that from his dad." He said it loud enough for everyone to hear. He always does. Then Aunt Brenna chimed in, laughing through a sip of her wine. "At least the rest of us know who raised us." That counts for something, right? The table laughed. Not hard, not with joy. It was that uncomfortable, forced laughter people do when they want to belong to the moment, even if it's cruel. I looked at Zayden. His fork was still. His hands were calm. He didn't look at anyone, just me. Then he spoke. "Mom," he said quietly, "is it okay if I show them the letter you never sent him?" My throat tightened. I forgot how to breathe for a second. The room, just moments ago buzzing with smug little jabs and clinking silverware, went completely still. I couldn't look at anyone else, just him, the letter. He'd found it almost a year ago while looking for crayons in my desk. It was folded inside a manila folder buried beneath old receipts and unopened mail. A letter I wrote to his father, Rhea, when Zayden was still in diapers. I never mailed it. I never planned to. It wasn't for him. It was for me. Something to pour my grief into and hide away. When Zayden first asked about it, I told him it was just something I wrote when I was sad. That was the truth. He didn't push me. He just nodded and put it back. But he never forgot. Now he was asking me in front of everyone if he could open the door I had shut for a decade. I looked around the table. My father was frozen, jaw clenched. Myra's eyes darted toward me, panicked. Clay looked like he didn't know whether to laugh or apologize. No one spoke. No one made a sound. Zayden waited, and I nodded. Because in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't ashamed anymore, not of my past, not of being a single mother, and definitely not of my son. What happened next shattered everything my family thought they knew about us. I didn't grow up dreaming of being a single mom. I used to imagine a life that looked a lot like the family portraits my mom hung on our walls. Everyone smiling, pressed clothes, someone's hand always resting protectively on someone else's shoulder. That wasn't real, of course, but when you're a kid, you believe the picture, not the silence between the people in it. I was 22 when I found out I was pregnant with Zayden. His father, Rhea, was my college boyfriend. We'd met in a digital photography class, bonded over a shared love of road trips and a mutual hatred of cafeteria coffee. He was magnetic, funny, charming, the kind of guy who made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He told me he loved me 3 weeks in, told me we'd figure everything out. But the day I showed him the pregnancy test, something in him shifted. He stayed around for a few weeks, distant and uneasy, then said he needed time to think. He never came back. I didn't chase him. I could have. I had his number, his mom's address. But something in me knew if he didn't want to be here now, I didn't want to beg him to stay later. When I told my parents, my mom cried. My dad just stared at me like I'd broken something sacred. Clay laughed and said, "Well, at least it's not twins." That was the first time I felt the weight of shame settle on my chest, not because I was pregnant, but because I realized how little grace existed in the place I called home. Still, I carried Zayden on my own. I finished school, found work, got an apartment, built a life from scratch. It wasn't easy, but there was joy in it. The first time Zayden laughed, it felt like forgiveness. The first time he said, "Mama," I knew I could do this, not in theory, in reality. Zayden was never a loud child. He liked puzzles and bedtime stories and asking questions that made you pause. "Why do some people have to be mean to feel big?" he asked me once when he was 7. I didn't have a good answer. I still don't. I protected him from most of my family's bitterness for as long as I could. Holidays were the hardest. Every year, we drove back to Asheville and stepped into a house that smelled like cinnamon and judgment. My parents never said anything directly about Reese, but the topic hovered in the air like static. And every time Clay made a joke about daddyless homes, about kids growing up soft, everyone else just let it happen. My mom would pat my arm and whisper, "Just ignore him." But ignoring poison doesn't make it harmless. It just lets it spread. That Thanksgiving, I told myself we'd leave early if things got weird. I told Zayden he could bring his sketchbook and his novels. He packed The Giver and Charlotte's Web. I packed Tums and wine. When we arrived, the house looked exactly the same. The white siding, the rust-stained porch swing, my dad's truck in the driveway like it had never moved. Inside, Myra gave me a long hug that didn't match her stiff posture. Clay smirked like he was waiting to be amused. Aunt Brenna launched straight into gossip. Zayden clung to my side for the first 10 minutes before finally sitting on the armrest beside me like a silent shadow. During dinner, I kept my voice low, hoping to keep the evening from tipping. I complimented the food. I helped clear plates. I smiled too much. I told myself Zayden wouldn't notice the tension, but of course he did. He notices everything. He leaned over and whispered, "Why does Grandpa never talk to me?" I didn't know what to say. Luther barely spoke to me either, unless it was to tell me where the towels were or to ask why I hadn't remarried yet. With Zayden, he stayed silent. No questions, no hugs, nothing. I said, "Maybe he just doesn't know how." Zayden nodded, like he understood more than I wished he did. And just when I thought we might make it through the night without incident, Clay opened his mouth and everything unraveled. But before that moment, before the silence, before the letter, before the look in my son's eyes that broke the cycle, we were just 2 people sitting at a table, pretending this was what family was supposed to feel like. Dinner was over, but no one had gotten up yet. The table was cluttered with half-empty glasses, crumpled napkins, and the kind of forced laughter that always follows too much wine and too many years of resentment. I sat there, shoulders tight, watching my family pretend they were happy to be together, and I waited. I always waited for the moment it would turn. It started, like it always did, with Clay. He leaned back in his chair, one arm slung over the back like he owned the room. His voice was just loud enough to make sure everyone heard. "Kid's quiet," he said, tilting his chin toward Zayden. "Guess he takes after his dad, huh? You know, the guy who vanished." A few of them chuckled. Not real laughter. Just nervous sounds, the kind that say, "Let's not make this a thing." My stomach tightened. I reached for my water and didn't say a word. Zayden didn't look up. He kept his eyes on the edge of the table, tracing the grain of the wood with his thumb. Clay wasn't finished. "Seriously, though, Elle," he added, turning to me, "you ever think about telling Reese? Maybe the guy just forgot he has a kid." The laughter got a little louder. Myra gave an awkward half-smile and started collecting plates. Aunt Brenna smirked and said, "Or maybe Reese saw where this was going and ran for it. I mean, look at this kid. Sweet, but no real backbone." I opened my mouth. but nothing came out. My face was hot. My pulse thudded in my ears. I could feel the blood in my cheeks, in my throat. I looked around the table. My father said nothing, chewing the last of his roll like he hadn't heard a word. And Zayden, he still hadn't said anything. He was sitting straight, hands in his lap, shoulders drawn in. I reached over, gently touched his wrist. "Are you okay?" I whispered. He nodded once. Then he stood up. The movement startled everyone. Chairs shifted. Clay blinked like he couldn't figure out what was happening. Zayden looked straight at me, his voice calm but clear. "Mom," he said, "is it okay if I show them the letter you never sent him?" You could have heard a pin drop. I froze. The letter. A year ago, I'd caught him reading it, folded in half, tucked in the back of my father's desk drawer, buried under junk mail and old manuals. I thought he'd forgotten about it. I prayed he had. I hadn't even meant to keep it. I just didn't know how to throw it away. Now he was asking if he could bring it into this room, this hostile, echoing space filled with people who had never once asked what it felt like for him to grow up with silence in place of a name. I glanced at Luther. His eyes were narrowed, his mouth a straight line. He didn't say a word. Myra had stopped moving, one plate still in her hand. Clay was frowning now, confused, like the joke had turned on him. "Why don't we all just settle down?" Aunt Brenna said, her voice brittle. "Zayden, honey, there's no need to—" Zayden cut her off, gently but firmly. "There is," he said. "You don't talk about people like that. Not when you don't know what happened, not when it hurts someone." My heart cracked open right there. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't pointed fingers. He just told the truth. "I want them to know," he continued, "because they keep pretending like not having a dad is a joke, but it's not." I wanted to grab his hand, to tell him it was okay, that we didn't owe them anything. But this wasn't about me anymore. This was Zayden reclaiming something. He turned to me again. "Can I?" My voice came out shaky but strong. "Yes," I said. "Go ahead." And just like that, he turned and walked toward the study, toward the drawer where I had hidden a piece of my past and tried to leave it there. The whole table watched him go. No one laughed. No one spoke. Because deep down, I think they all knew the same thing I did. Whatever came next was going to change everything. Zayden disappeared down the hallway, and the house felt like it was holding its breath. No one said a word. Not Clay, not Brenna, not even my father, who'd been chewing on something bitter and invisible since the moment we walked in the door. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator and my own heart pounding in my chest. I sat perfectly still, watching the spot where my son had just stood. I wasn't sure what scared me more, the fact that he remembered the letter or the fact that he believed in it enough to show them. I thought I'd buried that part of me. I thought I'd closed the chapter, stuffed it in a drawer, and let the dust seal it shut. But Zayden had pulled the thread, and now everything I had carefully stitched together was coming apart. My mother broke the silence first. "Alara," she whispered, placing a shaky hand on my shoulder. "Maybe it's best if—" I pulled away. "No," I said. "Let him." Myra looked startled, but she didn't argue. Maybe she knew she couldn't. Maybe, for once, she was beginning to understand that silence could be just as cruel as any joke. A minute passed, then another, then footsteps. Zayden returned slowly, carefully holding a yellowed envelope in both hands like it was something sacred. He didn't look at anyone except me. "You sure?" he asked softly. I nodded. "Okay," he said, then turned to face the table. "This is a letter my mom wrote to my dad," he began, his voice even and calm. "She never sent it. I found it by accident. I wasn't supposed to see it, but I did. I didn't say anything back then. But after today, I think you should hear it." The room remained still. Clay shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Aunt Brenna's smirk was gone. My dad leaned back, arms crossed, eyes locked on Zayden. But he said nothing. Zayden unfolded the paper and began to read. "Dear Reese, I'm writing this because I don't know what else to do with the feelings I have. I'm not angry, even though maybe I should be. I'm just tired. Tired of wondering what I did wrong. Tired of feeling like I'm raising a child with only half a story to give him. I wish you could see him. He's beautiful. He's curious. He asks questions I can't always answer. Like, Where's my dad? And did he love me before he left? I tell him yes, because it's the only thing that doesn't break me. But I'm not writing to ask you for anything. Not money, not time, not even closure. I'm writing to say I forgive you, and I'm done waiting for you to show up. I'll raise him on my own, and he will be okay, and I will be okay. Not because you left, but in spite of it. Zayden folded the letter slowly and placed it gently on the table. His eyes scanned the room. You all joke about me not having a dad, he said, steady as stone, like it's funny, like it makes me less. But I have a mom who stayed, a mom who gave everything, and I think that matters more. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt the tears hit my hands. No one spoke. Clay looked down at his plate. For once, his mouth had nothing to say. Myra wiped her eyes and reached for the letter. She didn't try to read it. She just held it, like maybe touching it could fix something inside her. Even my dad, stoic, immovable Luther, shifted in his chair. His jaw clenched and unclenched. He stared at Zayden, then at me, then back at the letter. And though he didn't say a single word, something cracked in his expression, the way guilt does when it finally runs out of excuses. Zayden walked back over to me, calm and proud, and sat down without a word. He leaned into my arm, and I wrapped it around him like I'd been waiting to do it my whole life. No one asked any more questions. No one made another joke, because the truth had been spoken. And you can't laugh in the face of something that real. No one moved. No one spoke. My father, the man who had built our house with his own hands and ruled it with silence, stared at the folded paper as if it were a weapon. And in a way, it was. Not because it was cruel, but because it held everything they had tried to pretend wasn't true. Everything they thought they had the right to judge without understanding. Zayden sat beside me, shoulders relaxed, eyes steady. His hands were folded in his lap. He looked free. Like saying those words had lifted a weight I didn't know he was carrying. I thought I was the one shielding him from pain all these years. But he had been watching, absorbing, quietly shaping himself into someone stronger than any of them gave him credit for. Clay cleared his throat. He looked down, then up, then back at his glass like he wished it were something stronger than cider. I didn't mean anything by it, he mumbled. Zayden turned to him and tilted his head, calm but unyielding. Yes, you did. Clay blinked, taken aback. You meant to make me feel small, Zayden continued. And maybe that's what you think is funny, but it's not. He didn't shout. He didn't flinch. He just told the truth, and somehow that cut deeper than anger ever could. Clay's jaw worked like he wanted to argue, but nothing came out. Myra, my mother, who had sat through years of dinners like this without saying a word, finally spoke. You shouldn't have said that, Clay, she said, her voice trembling. Not to him, not to her. He looked like he'd just been slapped. What? Now I'm the bad guy for joking around? It's not joking if it hurts someone, she said. And if you knew your sister at all, you'd know what it took for her to raise that boy alone. I hadn't heard my mother speak that sharply in years, maybe ever. Clay pushed back from the table, muttering, "This is ridiculous," and walked out of the room. No one stopped him. Aunt Brenna didn't speak either. For once she had nothing to add. Then my father stood up. Luther was not a man who liked being challenged. He didn't speak unless he had something to correct, something to fix. But now, as he walked around the table, I didn't see anger in his face. I saw something else. Conflict, maybe. Or shame. He stopped in front of Zayden, looked down at him, then turned to me. I read that letter, he said, voice rough and uneven. I stared at him. What? The day you put it in my desk, I saw you. I didn't mean to pry, but I read it. All of it. My breath caught. I didn't know what to say, he continued. I figured if I ignored it, it'd go away. I thought maybe you'd get over it. Move on. Find someone else. I felt Zayden shift beside me. But I was wrong, Luther said. You didn't need fixing. You needed someone to say you were doing a good job, that you were strong, that he's a good boy. His voice cracked slightly on that last word. Zayden looked up at him, uncertain. I don't know how to talk to kids, Luther admitted. Never did. I thought boys needed their fathers, and since he didn't have one, I didn't know where I fit. You didn't have to fit, I said. You just had to try. He nodded, slowly, like maybe that thought had never occurred to him until now. Then he turned to Zayden again. I'm sorry, son, he said. You didn't deserve any of that. Zayden blinked. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then finally he gave a small nod. Okay, he said. Not warmly, not coldly, just honestly. It was enough. The room didn't erupt into hugs. There were no grand speeches. But something real had cracked open, something honest. And for once, it didn't get buried. I looked around the table. The letter still there, my son sitting straighter, my father standing humbled, and realized something had shifted. They had always wanted to define us by what we lacked, but now all they could see was who we were. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The house felt different after that. Not louder, not lighter, just quieter. Like someone had finally turned off a low, humming noise that had been in the background for years, so constant I hadn't noticed how much it drained me until it stopped. Zayden leaned into my side as everyone slowly returned to clearing dishes and mumbling excuses to leave the table. No one made eye contact. No one reached for the letter again. It stayed exactly where he left it, neatly folded, sitting like a stone in the middle of a pond. Myra moved past us, placing her hand gently on my shoulder. You raised a good boy, Alara, she said softly. I nodded, but I didn't speak. I didn't trust my voice not to break. We sat there a little longer, just the two of us, until Zayden whispered, Did I make it worse? I turned toward him, heart aching. No, I said. You made it real. That's what they needed. What I needed, too. He nodded like he understood. And maybe he did. He'd always been older in spirit than his years. Sometimes I wondered if the absence of his father had made space for something deeper in him to grow. Compassion, clarity, courage, things I hadn't even learned until well into adulthood. After a while, we went outside. The air was sharp with November chill. The sun had dipped below the trees, casting long, quiet shadows over the yard. Zayden sat on the porch swing and pushed it gently with his toes, while I pulled a blanket around us both. Inside, I could hear Clay pacing, arguing with someone, maybe himself. Aunt Brenna had already left, claiming she had an early morning. My father hadn't said another word after his apology, but I saw the way he'd looked at Zayden. I saw what it took out of him to say what he did. For a man who believed emotions were weaknesses you kept locked away, even that small crack in his armor was something. We rocked on the swing for a long time, watching our breath cloud in the cold. Then softly, Zayden asked, Do you think he'll ever come back? My dad, I mean. I didn't lie to him. I don't know, I said. But even if he doesn't, it doesn't mean anything about you, or me, or who we are. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I don't think I want to meet him. I looked at him. Why not? Because he left, and if someone can leave you that easy, I don't want to make space for them again. My throat tightened. You don't have to, I said. Not ever. But if you change your mind one day, that's okay too. He leaned his head against my shoulder. I won't. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. That night, in the cold, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like laundry detergent and firewood, I realized something I hadn't let myself believe for years. We were enough. Not just surviving, not just scraping by, but whole, complete. My father didn't say goodbye that night, but when we got up to leave, I noticed something different. On the mantel, where he used to keep a photo of Clay's family at Disneyland, there was a new frame. A picture of me holding Zayden when he was 3 years old, his curls wild, both of us laughing at something out of frame. I didn't even know that photo still existed, but there it was, centered, visible. When I saw it, I knew something had shifted in him, maybe just a little, maybe not forever, but it was a start. On the drive home, Zayden fell asleep in the passenger seat. His sketchbook was open on his lap. He'd drawn something. Stick figures, simple lines, but unmistakable. A woman and a boy standing under a tree. The woman had wild hair. The boy had a cape. Underneath, he'd written, Not every hero wears a mask. I drove in silence, the kind that feels warm, not empty. The kind you earn. For a long time, I carried shame like a second skin, like it was part of being a woman raising a child alone. But watching my son speak truth in a room full of people who thought they could define us, that's what stripped it away. Zayden doesn't need a real dad to be real himself, and I don't need their approval to know I've done something right. What we have is love, resilience, honesty, and it turns out that's more than enough. If you've made it this far, thank you. Thank you for listening to our story. I didn't share this to get sympathy. I shared it because someone out there needed to hear it. Someone who's ever been judged for raising a child on their own. Someone who's been made to feel like love without a title is somehow incomplete. Someone like me. Someone like Zayden. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of your own journey or opened your eyes to someone else's, please give it a like. It helps more people find it. And if you've got a story of your own, something you've carried in silence or something you've overcome, share it in the comments. You never know who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real stories like this. And if you think someone in your life needs to hear this one, send it to them. Sometimes a story is the first step toward healing. I'm Alara. This was ours.